I'm pleased to acknowledge in our midst the presence of democratic leaders from Africa, United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States of America, who have obliged to share their vast experience with us. Your Excellencies, we have had a robust and fruitful engagement with you as a father and leader for the past 8 years of your administration. In the National Economic Council, NEC, chaired by the Vice President, members of the Governors Forum interface with your administration on national political economy issues and adopt measures for economic development and sustainability. We are grateful to have you in our midst today. I'm also using this opportunity to thank my colleagues, your Excellencies, for the golden opportunity and support bestowed on me to serve you and steer the affairs of the Forum for the past 6 months. I have gained remarkable knowledge and experience on issues of governance, subnational cooperation, and intergovernmental relations on a wider spectrum. These have helped us to establish cordial and harmonious relationship with the federal government with seamless collaboration for federalist consolidation. On behalf of the Governors Forum, I want to particularly thank Mr. President for his immense support to the states and coming to their rescue in times of difficult financial and infrastructural challenges. His recognition of the states as critical stakeholders in a constitutionally defined, independent, co-equal, and interdependent federalist composition has been legendary. His numerous interventions have helped in rescuing the state and the nation on several occasions from economic recession and sustained the Federation on the path of socio-economic stability and political consolidation. Most recently, Mr. President assented to some constitutional alteration bills into law. Electricity, railway, and correctional services are now on the concurrent list. States have been empowered constitutionally to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity in areas covered by the national grid. We now have financial independence of state houses of assembly and state judiciary. Presidents and governors are expected to submit the names of persons nominated as ministers and commissioners within 60 days of taking off of office for confirmation by the Senate or State House of Assembly. These, among others, are landmark constitutional reforms. Full diversification of the economy entails shifting away from reliance on export of commodities like oil, gold, and agricultural produce to industrialization for genuine development and sustainable growth of our economy. The articulation of our national industrialization policy, improved power supply, and human capital development are critical in our quest for industrialization, for poverty alleviation, and employment generation. This is a task the incoming administration must take seriously for national socio-economic integration. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as some of us are exiting as helmsmen of our respective states, the new and incoming governors are reminded of the task ahead. We have made giant strides in our various states within limited resources at our disposal in the areas of infrastructural development and provision of social services. We faced the most difficult times in the economic management of our states during the COVID-19 pandemic. We exited recessions, and the economy is now on the pathway for sustainable growth. You now face the important task of putting viable strategies in place, assembling competent teams, and collaborating with the federal government to move the nation forward and provide relief to the teeming populace whose mandate you are going to exercise in the next 4 years. You must work hand in hand with the federal government as members of the National Economic Council to boost the economy in tandem with the global best practices. The management of state economies that are totally dependent on accruals from the Federation account is not an easy task. For most of the states, internally generated revenues are improving with some investment reforms measures being put in place. The mandate you have is accompanied with high expectations. Consolidating economic democratic dividends through good governance and service delivery are critical in meeting the people's expectations. Borrowing to finance socio-economic challenges is not a reliable alternative. This is the position of the National Economic Council, chaired by the Vice President, with the governors as members. Subnational governments should work hard to multiply revenue generation bases to generate more revenues for the betterment of the people. Revenue generation agencies of government at the federal and state levels should partner more to generate revenues through taxation to meet fiscal responsibilities. Prompt payment of taxes by citizens will shore up revenue base and provide subnational governments the resources to meet up with their statutory responsibilities to the people. There is the need to collaborate with agencies of the federal government in this regard to avoid double taxation and boost the ability of the states to generate funds through taxation. Unemployment, poverty, and insecurity are difficult tasks incoming administrations are expected to face in their respective states. Building strong, viable institutions in the polity will help in tackling unemployment, reducing poverty, and ensuring the provision of security of lives and property. This is a worthy legacy to be bequeathed to our children and generations to come. At this juncture, I wish to acknowledge the passion and steadfastness of the international community, particularly countries with well-developed political systems and democracies, for their support in the development of strong political system and democracy in Nigeria. We have had 24 years of uninterrupted democratic experience. This is still a nascent democratic journey compared to advanced countries, advanced democracies. We need to nourish and nurture it for strong consolidation and service delivery at the subnational level. We need to strengthen our institutions to perform and ensure sustainability in the provision of democratic dividends. These are the critical elements that sustain advanced democracies with institutional capacity and human capital development. Political corruption is inimical to economic development. It is a financial crime against the nation and humanity because of its negative impacts on the living conditions of the people and concentration of wealth in the hands of privileged few. We should collectively address corruption at all levels of governance. There is an urgent need for proactiveness in our approach to the menace of corruption. We should eliminate incentives to corruption by waging the war through a bottom-top approach. Loopholes that incentivize corruption should be blocked on all strata of the society. Politicians, civil servants, and corporate bodies should be severely punished, and the economic system sanitized to serve as a deterrent to others. There should be no sacred cow in the fight against corruption. Therefore, it is my fervent hope and wish that as we gather here today to brainstorm on key governance and management skills for national socio-economic development of our nation and people, incoming governors are expected to utilize these skills in the transition from electoral promises during campaigns to policy blueprints in government and governance process. I am optimistic that your shared determination will ultimately reflect on your engagement in the democratic business of governance through policy formulation and implementation for the good of our people. Finally, I welcome once again, Mr. President, our distinguished guests, new and returning governors, eminent resource persons, and invited guests, both within and outside Nigeria, to this historic event. I wish you fruitful interactions that will benefit your state and Nigeria as a whole. I pray that God Almighty will be your source of strength in consolidating democracy and sustaining development to greater heights in your respective states and the nation.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a true honor to be here today. And following two amazing women, my big sister Ngozi and my baby sister Zuera, it is a pleasure to be on the stage. Allow me to begin by congratulating our executive governors-elect on their re-election and on the re-election. I hope that you will find true value in this event and that you will draw strength from it in the challenging days and years ahead as you join hands in nation building. Dear friends and colleagues, we are meeting at a crucial moment, much of which Ngozi has laid out for us, for your states, for our country, and for the entire world. At a moment of great risks, but fortunately of even greater opportunities, if we can grasp them, this is when we can stand up and be counted. At a moment when the need for nation building, in the broadest sense of the terms, has never been greater. Within our communities, across ethnic and religious groupings, within countries and across the world, people are losing trust in one another intolerance is growing, and we've lost a sense of solidarity and common purpose. Our social fabric is tearing, and people question the social contract between leaders and their people. In 2015, the world, including Nigeria, came together at the United Nations to adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, now known as the SDGs, and a roadmap to a better future for everyone. In September this year, we will be halfway through to 2030, and sadly, we are off track. But we can rescue the SDGs. If we keep the status quo since 2015, then it will take us nearly 30 years to end injustice and indignity of extreme poverty, and even worse, 140 years before women have the same opportunity as men in politics and in business. But maybe even more worrying is the fact that the slow pace of change by the world's largest economies means that we are reaching a turning point where there is of no return, especially for our climate target for a 1.5 degree world, which puts us in jeopardy because currently we are on track for a 3.2 degree world. That makes most of this country uninhabitable, whether it is the north or it is the rising sea levels of the south that see Lagos State, for instance, disappearing underwater. The lack of progress is not for want of trying, and in the past 3 years alone, we have been hit by massive crises. The deadly impacts of climate change, the unprecedented disruption from COVID-19, and both a rising number of conflicts, as we see in Sudan today, but also the unthinkable war in Ukraine that has impacted the world way beyond Europe. And the harsh truth is that these crises have played out very differently in the global north of those that have, and in the global south of those that don't have so much. Countries in Africa have borne much of the burden. Between 2020 and 2022, staple food prices in sub-Saharan Africa rose by an average of 23.9%. And Africa still remains home to 44% of the world's forcibly displaced persons. And let me underscore, forcibly. They would not move if they did not have to move. And today, sadly, we have 600 million people in the continent that lack access to electricity. And between the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the soaring inflation, Africa's debt is at its highest level in over a decade, with 23 countries either bankrupt or at high risk of debt distress. The impacts of these crises are being felt here in Nigeria too. Economic growth in Nigeria dropped to 1.8% during the pandemic, and while it has since rebounded at over 3%, it is still far below the rate that is needed to drive inclusive development. And all the while, terrorism has been taking a heavy toll, both human and financial, in our country and beyond our borders into the Sahel. One estimate from UNDP suggests that terrorism has cost Nigeria over $97 billion in 10 years. All of this has an impact on performance against the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, with progress in Nigeria stalled on 14 of the 17 goals. And behind these headlines lies the lives and the struggles of millions of Nigerians, especially our women and youth. All of this affects what I see as a bottom line for politicians: social cohesion, when we fail to deliver for people on their rights, their futures. We erode their faith in power, in politics, and in the state. And that results in a loss of trust, in resentment between generations towards elite, and in greater tensions between groups, cultures, ethnicities, and religions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the only way to build a more cohesive nation and a more harmonious world is to deliver better for people. Better services, better opportunities, whether they leave for better jobs or they return for even better jobs and life. Better safety, better government, and a healthier environment. Despite all the challenges, I believe that we have what we need to take a great leap forward in these areas in the next few years. Massive investments and political attention in a number of concrete areas will be key. Allow me to focus on one specific: energy. Globally, we need to end our addiction to fossil fuels while building the base load that we do not yet have and expanding access to reliable, clean and affordable energy for everyone. In Nigeria, we face a situation where 36% of households do not have access to electricity grid and where we remain mostly entirely dependent on fossil fuels for electricity generation. Nigeria does have a well-defined energy transition plan, and our energy mix must change, and the international community must meet its investment pledges to support countries in this transition. We know that the green and blue economy has a huge potential to unleash the next great wave of human development with women and youth as the beneficiaries, opening new frontiers in the economy where we need to both expand and rethink how we deliver food systems and agriculture, how we rethink the transformation for education and the skill sets that will be needed for the markets that we want to engage with, digital connectivity, social protection, and protecting our environment. In each of these areas, we face great challenges, but if we can find the tools to break through, the opportunities for Nigeria and indeed the entire world are huge. So we need to make sure that Nigeria does not get left behind and reassess its presence and its leadership in the continent and on the world stage. As you look to your governors' visions, your missions, you must answer a key question: what do you need to accelerate these transformations in your state? Of course, every state has a different starting point, a different asset base, challenges and different circumstances. But I see 4 common areas where action and attention are urgently needed across the country. First, you will need institutional capacity. The apparatus of state must be strengthened, whether it's preparing civil and public servants, leveraging digital technologies and data systems, or empowering oversight bodies and local authorities. And you don't have far to look. Those coming into government can take a leaf from the book of Kaduna State, from Gombe State, from Lagos State. There's no substitute for inclusive, effective, and accountable public institutions. Promoting effective international cooperation offers an unprecedented opportunity as a driver of transformation, which Nigeria can show to the rest of the continent and the world. The question will be, are you ready to make that step up? 65% of the SDGs, and these are not a foreign agenda, this is your agenda. It is health, it is dealing with poverty, it's education, it's investing in infrastructure, in energy, it is building institutions, it is finding partnerships to finance the cost. But 65% of the SDGs can be won or lost at the subnational level. By 2050, 68% of the world's population will live in cities. These cities will garner wealth and become centers of innovation and progress. But at the same time, they could also fuel greenhouse gases, waste, spatial inequalities, and insecurity. Therefore, strengthening planning and in a coordinated, all-of-government approach within and between multiple levels of governance will be pivotal to accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, the vision of Nigeria, and to equip coordinated responses to localize and to better align efforts of national and local governments to achieve the SDGs. And in this case, we will have to give the place of local governments, of state governments, and the national level, in that order, the investments and the precedents that are needed to build a nation. Second, you will need trusted partnerships. Partnerships with central government, with the private sector, with civil society, academia, and with international financial institutions, and indeed with the United Nations, of which you are a big part. Our resident coordinators and our UN country teams are here in Nigeria at your service, but also across borders in the continent, with new sustainable development cooperation frameworks that underscore the priority of government. This is the bedrock of our collaboration in the shared pursuit of the SDGs, but also of the African Union's 2063 Agenda. But beyond formal support for programming and policy work, We are also here to help to convene and to broker the partnerships that are necessary to carry these priorities forward. We do have a unique convening power, and we're ready to deploy it whenever sustainable development progress is possible. This brings me to the third point, financing, the means of implementation. Ngozi had spoken to us about trade. That is one of the means of implementation, as is technology, as is finance, and the capacities to do this. Since 2015, we've talked globally about moving from billions of dollars to trillions to support developing countries to drive their own national transformation. With global savings at over $230 trillion, a price tag for the SDGs is a mere $8 trillion. So we know we have the resources globally. That kind of shift still hasn't happened, and it's one of the biggest obstacles that we do have to development. The Secretary General is leading a global push to reform the international financial architecture where we can get this right, to deal with the debt crisis that are massively influenced by the global crises, to ensure we deal with liquidity constraints and the investment in developing countries by access to cheaper and longer-term finance. For debt restructuring, it is about us, for what we had not expected, to see a better use of that debt, longer-term and cheaper. The opportunities of the SDRs, which were the largest in history, from the IMF, $650 billion, Africa got just over $36 billion. However, there is now an ask that the world puts for rechanneling 100 billion SDRs into the World Bank, into the African Development Bank, which means we can leverage more money that comes from the banks for our development. And speaking to investments won't come today with the kind of risk profiles we have. And while that narrative, we have a lot to do about changing it, it will be one that we have to do together with our colleagues in the international community. On the domestic front, we must address the informal sector, as we heard earlier. It does have disposable income, and we can work with them to find ways that that disposable income can access the basic services that they need. Before, as Ngozi again has said, to put a tax system in place that targets the informal sector, then we have to be ready to deliver on the taxes that we take from people. Committed leadership, and fourth and last, the area that is most in your hands is leadership. Committed leadership that can tap into these opportunities and guide the nation towards inclusive, sustainable development that really does truly leave no one behind. And for each one of your states, you need to see a mapping, your data that shows you exactly who those no ones are, how many people are living beneath the poverty line, how many people are out of work, how many don't access education, don't access health, and if they do, is it of quality? Is it of the education and health that you received? The first term goes very fast, and the second term even faster. Campaign promises made must be delivered, and that's hard. It requires an effective team, one that can deliver on those promises that have been made. Resource constraints are very real. Domestic resource mobilization is urgent. Prioritizing, phasing, leveraging other partnerships will be key. Communicating and consulting will create less distraction, and it does help to manage the expectations. But perhaps the greatest of challenges that you will have at the state level will be how to change the mindsets. Under the Constitution of Nigeria, you have the authority and the responsibility to deliver on critical foundations of infrastructure and services, basic services, rights of people that can deliver on social and economic development. But to do so, you will have to lead, whether it's from the front, from the side, or from the back. The word that runs across all is leadership. You must inspire and shape a better future that includes everyone. You must bring the population on this journey with you, balancing the political economy for the benefit of all and not just a few. You must take every opportunity to have women and youth, not just at the table, but empowered to make meaningful contribution in the discourse. You must also open up to your political adversaries and govern with vision, with courage, tolerance, and humility. Your Excellencies, with only 7 years to go to meet the promises of the 2030 agenda, and even less in your first term, time is not on our side. Nigerians have very high expectations, and the world is watching. Remember, the transformation will not happen in a vacuum or by chance. The context we know is tough. Nigeria must prepare and be ready to take that quantum leap. I urge all of you, individually and collectively, to seize the moment of nation building by leveraging on the efforts made and working hand in hand with each other first, but with the President-elect Tinubu's administration, and I'm confident that you can steer our great nation to renewal and transformation. And of course, the UN will ever be at your disposal. Finally, as a Nigerian woman, let me also urge you to delegate to women's leadership. Many of you in this room have deputy governors that are women, but we need to see them in the cabinets and decision-making roles. We need to see them in business, and so that the next business person that speaks at this podium will be co-chairing with Tony Elumelu, but it'll be a woman. And in that way, we can see the equity in business, because for sure we know that women have the expertise and need the equal to challenge and have a right to do so in our nation building. As a democracy, thank you, women, as a democracy in progress, lessons must be learned, especially over the last election, and the healing must occur if we are to deepen that governance, to gain back that trust, and to meet the expectations of our people. Finally, may I say, may the Almighty give you the wisdom, the courage to lead this country into a new dawn. I thank you.
Every nation is a work in progress. The task of nation building is a continuous one. So even if we have made mistakes, there's always a chance to change course. The fatal mistake in nation building is refusing to learn lessons and failing to course correct where needed. In our country, given its size, diversity, and economic development challenges, the scale of the task of nation building is particularly large. As you take office or return to your governorships, our 222 million compatriots will be counting on you, governors, to rise to the occasion. The states are closest to the people. What you do or don't do, as you've heard already, directly impacts people across the country. Excellencies, Nigerians are not building our nation in a vacuum. When shaping policies and strategies, we need to do so in the context of what is happening in the world. So, we need to wake up and smell the coffee, Excellencies. The world is changing fast, in good ways and bad, and the bad ways are more obvious these days. The COVID-19 pandemic has dealt enormous setbacks to the global economy. These have been compounded by inflation, leading to high food and energy prices, rapid monetary tightening, and the impact of the war in Ukraine. Climate change is an existential threat impacting the world, and our country, Nigeria, has not been spared, with more frequent and devastating floods in the south and east, and droughts and desertification in the north. Growth is slowing down around the world. The IMF estimates that global GDP will expand by just 2.8% this year, compared to 3.4% last year, and the 3% projected for 2024. The WTO's forecasts on trade are similarly subdued. Our economists estimate that the volume of global goods trade will grow by only 1.7% in 2023, nearly a full percentage point lower than the average for the past decade. There are worrying signs of regional divergence, with Africa's export volumes projected to shrink by 1.4% this year, compared to a 3.3% growth for North America, for instance. For Nigeria itself, the IMF projects 3.2% GDP growth this year and 3% next year, slightly better than global growth, but underperforming the projected growth rates for sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, which are 3.6% and 4.2% respectively. The current GDP growth rates are higher than the low 1.2% average annual growth rate registered between 2015 and 2019, the 5 years before the pandemic, but well below the 6.4% average for the preceding 5-year period from 2010 to 2014. In most developing countries and across much of Africa, per capita incomes remain well below pre-pandemic trends. Last year, the IMF reported that 60% of low-income countries were already in debt distress or at high risk of it. And we all remember what that means for investments in health, education, and infrastructure. Years of growth and development progress have been undone by the pandemic and other external factors. In this gloomy and uncertain global context, Nigeria has to work much harder to avoid falling even further behind. In taking the wider global context into account, if taking the wider global context into account is one prerequisite for successful nation building, another prerequisite is trust and a sense of common purpose. Excellencies, I remain convinced that a better future is within our collective grasp. But to move ahead and seize it, we will need political and business leaders at the state and national levels to form a compact in pursuit of pro-growth and pro-development policies. We ought to be seeking to double our growth rates and sustain that higher growth until we attain upper middle income status. We can also aim to double Nigeria's share of world trade from 0.33% to 0.66% within the decade. To build such a compact, we need trust. Nation building is impossible in the absence of trust, perhaps especially so in Nigeria. Even before independence, the generation of leaders that led us to freedom identified how important trust would be to our nation's success. In his first speech as Prime Minister in 1957, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa said, and I quote, "The peoples of Nigeria must be united to enable this country to play a full part in shaping the destiny of mankind. It is the duty of all of us to work for unity and encourage members of all our communities to live together in peace and harmony. The way to do this is to create understanding, mutual respect, and trust." This is from Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa in 1957. Honorable governors, let us be candid. Trust in Nigeria has always been fragile, but following the election, a lot of trust has been broken. Nigeria is a country with no social contract, meaning that Nigerian political leaders have never been able to agree with each other to stick to a common set of principles, values, and policies that consistently deliver for their citizens, regardless of ethnic group or political persuasion. Excellencies, you have a lot of healing to do within your states and between them. Through your words, deeds, and policies, you need to demonstrate to Nigerians that they are equally loved, that they can settle and do business in any part of the country without fear. I love Nigeria deeply, and I want to feel welcome in any part of this country. Just as different states need to rebuild perceptions among people across Nigeria, we collectively need to rebuild the Nigerian brand in the wider regional and international community. Narratives about countries matter for capital allocation decisions, especially for emerging markets and developing economies. When we have presented a positive story in the past, backed by a credible reform trajectory, foreign investment has followed. When we have shown that we are cognizant that we account for about 70% of the West African sub-region's GDP and 23% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP, and we have run our country and economy responsibly to benefit not just us, but the region and Africa as a whole, we have garnered respect. We must continue to recognize that Nigeria has an outsized role to play at home and abroad, and we must manage our country better, not just for ourselves, but for West Africa and the whole of Africa. So let us now turn to the economic situation within Nigeria and the task ahead, which is certainly no rosier than the global picture I described earlier. Growth and macroeconomic stability have faltered, and population growth is outpacing poverty reduction. The World Bank estimates that with the COVID-19 pandemic having pushed 5 million more of our fellow citizens into poverty, the number of Nigerians below the national poverty line reached 95 million last year, 43% of our population, which has considerably worsened from 40% in 2018-19 and an estimated 37% in 2015. Food insecurity is also on the rise. A government-led UN-supported analysis earlier this year warned that the number of Nigerians at risk of facing hunger could rise from 17 to nearly 25 million in the lean season between June and August. It is really hurtful when I hear Nigeria listed internationally as one of those countries where people may need food assistance. As a country with fertile arable land, we have no business being in that category. We have challenges on the fiscal debt and monetary policy fronts. Nigeria's gross debt level has climbed from 19.3 trillion in 2015 to 91.6 trillion in 2023. The debt to GDP ratio has almost doubled from 20 to 39% over that time period. And while the debt to GDP ratio may not look so alarming, as revenues decline, the burden of debt service has increased dramatically. The debt service to revenue ratio is certainly alarming at 83% in 2021 and 96% in 2022, according to the World Bank. This means that after servicing our debt, there's little room to pay for recurrent expenditures, let alone investment. The fiscal deficit of 5.3% of GDP is higher than our agreed fiscal rule of 3%. This has to be carefully monitored and brought down. Dealing with the fiscal deficit will, of course, be infinitely more difficult with an oil subsidy bill of 3.36 trillion for the first half of 2023, rising to 6.72 trillion if it stays through the year. The deficit is made worse by revenue losses from oil theft. The difficulties around this issue underscore the importance of political consensus, whether you are in government or in the opposition, on policies critical for nation building. On the revenue side, states have a substantial responsibility. Too few states are raising internally generated revenue of any significance. According to analysis of data from the National Bureau of Statistics and state-audited financial statements by the Civic Tech Group budget, 33 states relied on federal transfers for the majority of their revenue. For 13 of these states, monthly FAC allocations accounted for over 70% of revenue. Aggregated IGR from the 36 states did rise from 1.2 trillion in 2020 to 1.61 trillion in 2021, but this pales in comparison to FAC allocations to states of 2.23 trillion in 2020 and 3.16 trillion in 2022. While I commend those states that have made additional efforts, governors need to do much more. States must figure out ways to increase IGR. This goes hand in hand with using your share of the federal allocations, which is substantial, more transparently, efficiently, and effectively. You must share with your state citizens how much FAC allocation you receive each month, how much IGR you collect, and how you spend it. We used to publish this information routinely during my time as finance minister under Presidents Obasanjo and Jonathan. We must resume this practice so your citizens can have information to hold you accountable. Excellencies, please watch your debt profiles and keep careful control of expenditures, even as you invest in infrastructure, education, and basic health systems. Please endeavor to pay teachers, health workers, and others their salaries, and retirees their pensions. As I said in my book, Fighting Corruption is Dangerous, several Nigerian states have economies bigger than entire African countries. The FAC allocation received by some states is bigger than the budgets of several African countries. And if those countries can grow at 4, 5, or 6%, your states can do better. In terms of capital inflows, Foreign direct investment inflows have been weak, but remittances from the diaspora have thankfully remained robust. In 2021, FDI inflows were worth $3.3 billion, according to the World Bank, much better than in 2018 when they dipped below $1 billion, but still less than half the level from a decade before. Excellencies, some states that used to attract foreign direct investment did not receive a kobo last year. Whilst private domestic investment is extremely important, and we listen to one of our business people, we must work hard to attract and keep this, FDI is also much needed, and it's a good bellwether of external perceptions of the economic and political progress of our country. Let me say this. If you govern well, you're open, and you're transparent, you manage your state well, you will see investments coming, and so will multilateral organizations coming to help you. If you don't, you won't. As for remittances, the World Bank recorded $19.5 billion in inflows in 2021 and estimates that they'll rise to $20.9 billion in 2022. This strong performance is in keeping with trends elsewhere in the world. In tough times, Nigerians, like other migrants, dig deep into their pockets to help loved ones at home. But this is an area that state governments should take a careful look at. Diaspora remittances are helpful to shore up household consumption, but they can also be incentivized by you to support states with critical investments. Turning to monetary policy issues, multiple exchange rates, the dollar shortage, and the monetary financing of the government have contributed to instability. Inflation last year at 18.8% was at a 21-year high, leading to the need for monetary authorities to take action by raising interest rates. I must be clear that external factors in the global economy are partly to blame for this situation. But we need to recognize that our domestic management of the economy needs to improve. We need better understanding and coordination of monetary and fiscal policy. We must also look at trade costs. Nigeria and Africa more generally have some of the world's highest trade costs. WTO economists estimate that Nigerian exports to other countries in Africa face trade costs equivalent to a 460% tariff, while exports to the rest of the world face the equivalent of a 210% tariff. On average, Nigerian firms are dealing with trade costs that are 1.5 times higher than their competitors in high-income countries. We cannot effectively compete and trade regionally or globally whilst our businesses face such high costs. Looking to the years ahead, the ongoing global move away from fossil fuels will represent an earthquake and a substantial reorientation for the Nigerian economy. While we need to argue strongly for a sufficient transition period to net zero emissions, and I'm very glad to see we committed to 2016, the Paris Agreement, instead of 2050, which gives us an extra decade to transition, we need to start preparing now for a time when our oil and gas may no longer serve us as the main sources of revenue. States with a heavy dependence on FAC allocations will be particularly hit. It is important that you, governors, start now to diversify your revenue sources. The Nigerian economy itself is diversified with robust agriculture, manufacturing, and services sectors. But our revenue base is undiversified, as we all know, with over 90% of revenues concentrated in oil and gas. This has to change. We need to start taxing the non-oil sectors by broadening our non-oil tax base. Governor Tambuwal referred to this in his remarks. So much of our economy is informal. If state and federal government leaders can provide better support and services to informal sector enterprises, they can be registered as proper businesses, assisted to grow, and then become the basis for broader and deeper taxation. States need to think carefully of how to first support these enterprises to grow and eventually how to ease them into the tax net. Other types of revenue sources exist, including property and land taxes, and some states are already implementing these. But I need to remind you that taxation goes hand in hand with better service provision. You cannot tax people who see no benefits arising from such taxes. While the wholesale recalibration of our economy and diversification of revenue sources will not be easy, it contains opportunities for all of us to build a better future, especially for young Nigerians. One set of opportunities comes from the world's changing demographics. Advanced economies are aging fast, as are people in some emerging markets such as China, leading to labor shortages and productivity problems. With our young population, roughly half of Nigerians are under the age of 18, we have a chance to attract investment in labor-intensive production processes. An additional factor in our favor is that many businesses are already looking to diversify their production networks to better manage climate, economic, and geopolitical risks. The question for you governors and for Nigeria is this: how is the country gearing up to attract businesses that want to diversify their supply chains globally and into Africa in sectors like pharmaceuticals? How are you governors planning to make your states business-friendly so you can attract investment? Another set of opportunities comes from the fact that the world is becoming increasingly digital. Digitally delivered services trade is driving growth and global trade. Between 2005 and 2022, global trade in the services, everything from streaming games to consulting to finance, insurance, and tourism, grew by an annual average of 8%. The total value of digitally delivered services exports rose to almost $4 trillion in 2022. Our digitally savvy young people are launching tech startups and taking advantage of rising internet penetration at home and abroad. Interestingly, Nigeria's exports of digitally delivered services are also growing fast, by 23% on average per year since 2005. So we have an opportunity here to work on digitally delivered services trade. By riding these two transformations, demographic and digital, and taking full advantage of the multilateral trading system and regional economic integration in the African Continental Free Trade Area, Nigeria can become a platform for producing goods and services to meet demand at home, across Africa, and in the rest of the world. Doing so would be transformative in terms of job creation as well as productivity growth. Success is only possible if we get the skills base right and if we build the hard and soft infrastructure needed to seize the new opportunities. Yet, succeed we must. We don't have the luxury of not succeeding. Our greatest asset is the entrepreneurial dynamism of our young women and young men, which is second to none on the continent. Just look at Hilda Bassi, who is doing this cookathon to enter the Guinness Book of World Records. Everybody is cheering her on. Here's a young woman who's got an idea to project herself and the country forward. Our economy offers many bright spots of globally recognized excellence, above all our music, our film industry, our fashion industries. Artists like Burna Boy, Davido, P-Square, and Wizkid command a global following. I was in the Caribbean earlier this year and was delighted to hear people in St. Lucia listening to Nigerian music. Nollywood is one of the fastest growing creative industries. According to an Afrexim Bank report, it is worth $6.4 billion in 2021 and growing at 10% a year. Please remember this: if California were a country, it would be the fifth largest economy in the world, and it is largely built on services, including entertainment. I always say that the future of trade is services, it is green, and it is digital, and we have the tools and skills to capture new markets on the continent and elsewhere. Beyond music and Nollywood, there's scope for financial services, telecom services, insurance services. Our banks like Access, Guarantee Trust, Zenith, First Bank, UBA, must be commended for their successes operating in other parts of Africa and the world. They have the ability to do much more regionally, globally, whilst fostering financial inclusion at home. Fintech is fast developing as well as other types of tech, which you, governors, can capture in your states. I already mentioned our fantastic tech entrepreneurs. Nigeria continues to lead the continent in venture capital inflows, 22% of the $5.2 billion volume of VC deals on the continent last year went to startups headquartered in Nigeria, according to the African Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. But businesses like our tech startups will struggle to thrive if we keep losing so many of our most skilled young people to emigrated to Canada in 2021, joining 19,000 who had moved there in the previous 2 years. Estimates for 2022 are 20,000. That is over 50,000 skilled Nigerians moving to Canada in the space of 4 years. In the first half of 2022 alone, the UK granted skilled worker visas to nearly 16,000 Nigerians. Thousands of Nigerian-trained medical doctors work in the US. The most popular phrase in Nigeria now is, "I'm going to Japa." I'm not telling young people not to Japa. But what I'm saying is, how many of these Japas can we afford? If you Japa, you must also Kapa, which is to come back. Excellencies, you must make your states and all of Nigeria a hospitable, encouraging place where young people want to stay and thrive, not leave. Without young people, our demographic dividend disappears. I've mentioned all the exciting new sectors, but we mustn't also forget the existing ones of agriculture, production. Value addition to our agriculture will help put a dent in the country's food trade deficit, which stands at 2.29 trillion, the food import bill, which is at 2.29 trillion in 2021. And it would also create jobs and eventually boost regional exports. The Dangote Group plant in Lekki and the Indorama plant in Port Harcourt are proof that we can make some of the fertilizer our farmers need to ramp up production and value addition in the agriculture sector. It also sends two other important signals. One, that we in Nigeria can add value to our natural resources, and two, that as we move towards our 2060 target of net zero carbon emissions, we can use those resources to boost industrial production. As I said earlier, we can use gas as a potential transition fuel to ensure that electrification no longer constrains growth, even as we move to scale up renewables. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming to the end of my talk. You can see from this talk that we are not wanting for opportunities. We know we have challenges, but there are no challenges we in Nigeria cannot overcome. I believe so deeply in your ability and the ability of Nigerians, men, women, and youth, to overcome challenges. That is why you were elected leaders. So let me end on an optimistic note. Nigeria has what it takes in people, resources, and leaders. Our young people are waiting for you to choose wisely who you will work with, who will be your team. They are waiting for you to govern effectively and transparently with respect for people. They are waiting for you to rebuild and grow the economy of your states, to deliver results, and to lead with love and trust first, not fear. Our founding president, Nnamdi Azikiwe, said, and I quote, "There is plenty of room at the top because very few people care to travel beyond the average route, and most of us seem satisfied to remain within the confines of mediocrity." Excellencies, the task of nation building requires you to break the confines of mediocrity, travel new roads, aim for the top, deliver for our young people. Thank you.
Congratulations for the long, hard-fought elections. But now is the time to show your constituents why they have put their faith and hopes for a better life and living in your hands. I also want to thank the Nigerian Governors Forum, led by my brother, the Governor of Sokoto State, Governor Aminu Tambuwal, for this invitation to speak on a topic that I find very exciting and close to my heart, and vital to our dear country's future. Entrepreneurship, youth engagement, and wealth creation. The dynamics of governance in our country today calls for preparedness, and this program is laudable in laying important groundwork. No one can underestimate the role of good governance in contributing to the development of Nigeria. Our country has a population of 220 million people, the largest in Africa, and the great majority of our people are young. You each govern or will govern states with different dynamics, different population density, different composition of ethno-linguistic groups, different natural resources, different levels of economic activity, different rural and urban dynamics. But there's one constant. You will all govern states where there will be majorities of young people, Nigerians below the age of 35. What does this mean? We know politics. We know politics sees many interest groups and stakeholders competing, jostling. But your success will mean prioritizing the largest stakeholder group in your states, which is our youth. This is why this conversation we're having is so apt and timely. I urge you all to prioritize our young ones. It is the sure means to create the most impact and catalyze socio-economic development and growth for your respective states and Nigeria at large. I am not a politician, but I share your goals: a better, brighter tomorrow for Nigeria, a journey to unity, prosperity, and well-being for all. These are goals the private sector shares and can contribute to. Nigeria's destiny can only be achieved with public and private sectors working together for common good. That is why we champion entrepreneurship amongst our youth. An entrepreneur has a stake in our country's success. An entrepreneur carries others, family, employees, communities with him or her. An entrepreneur wants stability, power, education, respect, and certainty in their environment. With this foundation, entrepreneurs can be the engines of our growth. We know Nigeria is a nation of entrepreneurs. We need our governors to unleash this next generation. So I ask you, how can we make your states more entrepreneurial and geared towards the creation of wealth? How do we create the Nigerian Steve Jobs in the next 4 years of your first term in office? Yes, first term, 4 years. If you do a second term, as we pray and hope for, it's Jara, as we say in Nigeria. But it's good to work with just 4 years in mind. Let me give you my thoughts. First of all, it is about creating the right environment, the enabling environment. Each of our states is like a country on its own. Look at Singapore, a city-state, a country with 6 million people. In 1965, Singapore's GDP per capita stood at $500 US. In 1991, the per capita GDP for Singapore stood at $14,500. Today, the per capita GDP stands at $55,000, making Singapore one of the most developed and thriving countries in the world. This can be your state's story too. Singapore is a country with no oil, no abundance of natural resources, just human resources and purposeful leadership. Well, how did they get there? It was not a mistake. It took deliberate actions by focused leadership that started with the country's post-independence leader, Lee Kuan Yew. A combination of sound financial and economic policy coupled with a corruption-free environment and technological advancement has led to a massive increase in the standard of living of the people and reduction in poverty in the country. Likewise, in the Asian tiger economies of South Korea, Taiwan, you look at their success, you will see the same themes running through entrepreneurship, education, targeted credit assistance, incubators and accelerators, improved regulatory ease, etc. Your Excellencies, I would like you all to see yourselves as the presidents of your states, CEOs of your state, and lead mentors of your state. Every one of you can do this. And this starts from day one in office, and how you organize even your office and administration, how you set the vision and strategy for what you would like to achieve. I think of when we took over a distressed bank and created Standard Trust Bank, we set for ourselves a 3-tiered strategic plan of what we wanted to achieve. We were relentless, and in less than a decade, we achieved all that we were able to achieve. Pick the right team to help you drive your vision. It is so important that this is done right, with no sentiments. It is a disservice to the people you serve, your constituents, if you do not place competence above loyalty and sentiments. Let us be frank. In our country, there's too much reliance on allocation of funds from the center, from Abuja. We need to think beyond Abuja for source of our revenue. How do we create entrepreneurs? We have the largest youth population in Africa. The future of our states and country belong to our youth. We know young people in Nigeria are disengaged from the society, and this creates alienation and lack of purpose. This frustration manifests in extremism, immigration, and a slippery slope to crime. At the Elumelu Foundation, we are empowering young people across our 50 African countries. We understand firsthand the importance of entrepreneurship and youth engagement. We recognize the importance of young people in decision-making and leadership roles and empowering them to contribute to the development of their communities. We believe our young can make meaningful contributions to the society when provided with support they need. We must create a platform for the young majority to thrive, to be heard and contribute. The Nigerian youth unemployment rate is projected at about 51% in 2024. An idle mind attracts evil, and rightfully so. Youth engagement is crucial for the development of any society, and entrepreneurship can play a significant role in driving this engagement. As a private sector leader with interest in key sectors of the Nigerian economy through EZOD, Transcorp Group, United Bank of Africa Group, I see the challenges faced by our young people. Together, we as a group employ over 40,000 people across Nigeria, and I can attest firsthand to the wave of skilled people leaving the country for so-called greener pastures, the Japa syndrome. We must tell ourselves the truth. The world today is so global that talent will always move to where conditions are most favorable. We cannot afford to waste our most precious resource, our young people. I understand firsthand the importance of entrepreneurship in fostering youth engagement. Our Afro-capitalism philosophy demonstrates our belief that Africa's private sector can and must play a leading role in the continent's development. Entrepreneurship is a transformative process as it helps explore creativity, pursue passions, and allows to contribute meaningful impact to our own communities. It helps to build resilience and perseverance. Starting a business is not easy. Success is not even guaranteed. This administration has recorded some success in implementing policies that make it easier for entrepreneurs to start business. But we still need a lot more to be done to move the country forward. By engaging young people to pursue entrepreneurship, we can help them develop these important qualities that will serve them well in all aspects of life. However, there are still many obstacles that young people face when it comes to starting their own businesses, and these need to be addressed. Obstacles are access to capital, hostile business environments, and poor infrastructure. According to PwC, about 80% of small and medium-scale businesses in Nigeria fail within their first year of operation. Each of our governors here has a responsibility and should commit to creating favorable policies that ensure these businesses thrive. It is crucial for leaders to create the environment that empowers and supports our young people to harness their potential and create wealth for our nation. Your Excellencies, you should please foster the growth of a formal and competitive domestic private sector by creating fair, stable, and transparent market regulations in your state. At the Tony Elumelu Foundation, we have tried to empower 18,000 young Africans from all 55 African countries. We train them on how to do business, provide mentors for them, assist them as they try to scale their businesses, and we give them a non-refundable grant of $5,000 each. We support all types of businesses. We are sector agnostic. We have entrepreneurs in agriculture, fashion, entertainment, healthcare, manufacturing, etc. Now, these young businesses have gone on to create over 400,000 direct and indirect jobs across Africa. We have been able to achieve this impact working through partnerships with development organizations such as UN Development Program, UNDP, US Africa Development Foundation, the European Union, Google, the Red Cross, and we have partnered with countries like Congo DRC, Botswana, and here in Nigeria, a state like Anambra State has partnered with us to replicate some of these other stories. Now, imagine if we can replicate similar outcomes in each state of Nigeria and the federal capital. Governor Tambo, you know Shadi Sabi, who is from your state, Sokoto. He's a beneficiary of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. Through the support of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, I took Shadi to see President Obama when he was in office. He needed to see young Africans. He was the person we chose from Africa to go with me. Through the support of Tony Elumelu Foundation, Shadi started a school in Sokoto. He worked hard, was disciplined, and he stayed focused. Today, the young Shadi has grown his school to 6 branches in the state and has over 3,000 students. He has people from the state who are in school now, and 571 people are in his employment. Shadi is the second largest employer of labor, private sector employer of labor in Sokoto today, following Boa Cement. And he tells me how he wants to overtake Boa, and I said, keep the dream alive. This is the economic hope and opportunity that we need to give to our young ones. It is not rocket science. If we focus on young people in our respective states, empower them, create the enabling environment for them to succeed, we will solve our problems in this country. It is lack of economic hope or opportunity that leads a young man to carry AK-47 and join a terrorist or bandit group. We need to create the feeling and belief that it's a mutual destiny for our people. Poverty anywhere is a threat to all of us everywhere. Let me conclude. As a businessman, I invest for the long term. In politics, we must do the same. Invest in Nigeria, invest in long term in our country. Invest in our infrastructure. Be strategic. Identify those areas where we will all get the best return from. And by best, I mean best for our country in terms of stability, unity, prosperity, and the well-being of our people. I have seen how, in the power sector, when government, private sector, and community are aligned, results are transformational. Let us do the same for our young people. Nigeria's next generation are our hope for a better and more prosperous future. They are dynamic, they are vocal, they are patriotic, but they need our support. They need our attention, they need our empathy. They need our action. We need their participation in our society. We should embrace and welcome them. To our political leaders, united today in this important forum, I say, please create more private sector-friendly policies to increase wealth creation and encourage entrepreneurship. As leaders, policymakers, and stakeholders in our society, we must recognize the potential of entrepreneurship to promote youth engagement and wealth creation in Nigeria. We must invest in programs that support and encourage young people to pursue their dreams and aspirations and develop the skills they need to succeed as entrepreneurs. Let us work together to create an enabling environment for entrepreneurship to thrive in Nigeria and to empower our youth to become more active participants in the development of our country. Give them economic hope and they will transform Nigeria. And finally, My advice to our great governors and leaders, as you commence this journey, let us reflect on legacy. Reflect on your legacy. Ask yourself how history down the line will judge you, and what greater legacy is there than your gift to the next generation of Nigerians, the great destiny that awaits Nigeria. Thank you and good luck.
The Nigerian Governors Forum, Right Honorable Aminu Waziri Tambuwal, the Vice Chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, His Excellency Governor Atiku Bagudu, Your Excellencies, the governors of the various states of the Federation here present, and I believe the statements that have been made by the speakers in this first session are very, very instructive. And I gives a background to the address which I'm shortly going to read on behalf of the President. I also want to acknowledge former governors, including especially the immediate past chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, my dear friend, younger brother, Dr. Kayode Fayemi. Of course, we have two remarkable women, proudly Nigerian, and clearly global citizens who continue to make Nigeria proud. Her Excellency Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, my sister, and the other sister, His Excellency Amina Mohammed, United Nations Deputy Secretary General. I'd like to give you maybe a bit of a secret. In the United Nations, the longer your titles, the shorter your authority. And that is why the most authoritative person in the UN is simply Secretary General hyphenated. And then you have Deputy Secretary General. Congratulations to us and to the organization that they both serve, that is the World Trade Organization, of which Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is Director General, and of course the United Nations, the only global institution, imperfect as it is, but the multilateral forum that tries to articulate and harmonize the interests of things that bind us together. Captains of industry, I don't know if Tony Elumelu is still here, as an embodiment of the contribution that the private sector can make in a collective effort to advance the progress, peace, security, and prosperity of our people. Members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have one of the easiest of tasks, which is to deliver an address on behalf of the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, who had asked me to represent him on this very important occasion. And I quote, "I welcome you all to this induction program for governors organized by the Nigeria's Governors Forum, NGF. The NGF induction, as we have come to know it, is a program meant to prepare new and returning governors for the task of governance, for the task of leadership, and also for the task of stewardship. This has become a tradition and practice that is indeed remarkable and places each one of you along the path of success. In March 2023, Nigeria consolidated and reinforced its democratic process with a general election which saw the election of a new president and about 18 newly elected and incoming governors. I'm happy to note that democracy is alive and well, vibrant and thriving in Nigeria. With the elections now over, it is time for us, all of us, to deliver the promises we made during the campaign. I've always maintained that democracy is not an event and is not an end state, nor is it a static event. It is an evolutionary process that takes its participants on a journey of self-actualization. The process forces us to hold a mirror to ourselves, and by so doing, we are made to constantly review and improve its critical elements in order to ensure that we have an inclusive democratic practice that gives faith to the voters. We must therefore be patient, we must be tolerant, and use the appropriate channels to seek redress if we believe there have been unfair practices along the way. As you can tell, I'm speaking as a veteran of the process with the scars to show for it. I contested election for the presidency 4 times and only succeeded on the 4th attempt. And each of the previous 3 occasions, I've gone all the way up to the Supreme Court in order to allow the judicial process to take its course. On May 29th this year, you will be called upon, as later this month, you will be called upon to steer the affairs of your states for the next 4 years, at least for those who are being elected for the first time as governors. From this day, you become wholly responsible for the state as an enterprise. You, as the governor or state executive, inherit all its assets as well as liabilities. The assumption of office is a constitutional process that we must take with utmost dedication in light of the trust bestowed on you by those who elected you to office. One significant development that we all saw from the last election is that the electorate is maturing and people are increasingly finding their voices. Any public officer who fails to either meet up with the expectations of the people or deliver on his campaign promises will be voted out in the next election. That is what democracy is about: deliver or get shown the way out. I enjoined the forum to promote ideals that will address the challenges of democracy and of governance in our country today. The role of the subnationals is critical in our social economic development as a nation. Your proximity to the people gives you the privilege to have an instant pulse on the needs and challenges, and yours is to devise creative as well as judicious means of addressing the myriad of issues that confront them daily. As returning or incoming state executives, you also must be cognizant of the comparative advantages inherent in each of your states and how you can form partnerships with one another by leveraging your various strengths, experiences, and recognizing that there's no one size that fits all solutions. I also bid you to take this opportunity to unite across party divides in order to put the country first. I think one of the major contributions that the Nigerian Governors Forum has made is that it is an important forum, an instrument to promote policies that cross across political parties, that cross across geopolitical zones, while addressing the nation's interests. Nigerians deserve peace, they deserve progress, and they deserve security. A country where they have access to quality education, to health, and social services. Therefore, your ability to champion these values will significantly impact the atmosphere where the delivery of social goods and services will be conducted efficiently and harmoniously. We have made steady progress since we took office in 2015. The road has been bumpy due to a challenging fiscal climate, but I'm proud to state that as we leave office in about 2 weeks, we have built a firm foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and a more united Nigeria. We could not have done everything, but we focus on a number of areas, particularly infrastructure, agriculture, and strengthening and empowering the capacity of our armed forces.
On behalf of all of us in the forum, thank Mr. President, who was ably represented by the Chief of Staff. For many of us who have served during the period that President Muhammadu Buhari is the president, we have enjoyed equality of access. And I wish on behalf of my colleagues to record that. And equally, the National Economic Council, under the chairmanship of Professor Yomi Osibajo, has become a body of dialogue. And that is important because some of the things that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala spoke about requires trust building. And since the evolution of the body, where data is deliberated, where policy is deliberated between the federating units, there has been a lot of trust, especially in the challenges that we face. And I believe that is a credit to both President Muhammadu Buhari and Vice President Yomi Osibajo. And equally, we want to thank the Chief of Staff for the supportive role he provides to Mr. President, as well as congratulate him on that award from South Africa. Equally, we want to thank both the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations, Dr. High Excellency Amina Mohammed, and Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General. We don't presume that because they are ours, they will always come. We know the sacrifice that it entails for them to be here. More than that, to share their experience, both gathered from within and outside the country. I'm sure for most of us, when Ngozi said the hall feels somber, maybe she was warning us about what she's going to remind us about the state of the world economy and its effect on our own economy. But more than that, to alert us on the need to build consensus so that we can, particularly the governors-elect and returning governors, to join and come to quick agreement on some of the issues that are challenging us. We thank you for that. We equally thank all our development partners, both official and private. The World Bank has been especially helpful. Shuban, the Fiscal Transparency CIFTAS program, which is a $750 million program that was in place in the last 6 years, has enhanced fiscal transparency in all the states. And I think that enhances trust and the ability for states to enhance enhance their data and presentation to the private sector so that we don't waste a lot of time even teasing out what is correct and what is incorrect. Equally, the support by the private sector, especially during the COVID challenge, where we even have a private sector-led initiative that raises a lot of funds to support the recovery from COVID, and thanks to all the private sector players, Tony Elumelu, Dangote Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and indeed all of the sponsors, Access Bank, First Bank, GSL Consulting, New Globe, Premium Trust, Signature Bank, for all the support and partnership. Equally, I want to thank all our colleagues, especially I can see Senator Bukola Saraki, former Governor Victor Atta, former Governor of Cross Rivers, I believe, and former Chairman Kayode Fayemi, and indeed all outgoing governors, returning governors, and governors-elect, as well as members of the Secretariat of the Nigerian Governors Forum for organizing and supporting this event. Last but not the least is to thank all of you that responded to this invitation and supported this induction program in one way or the other. We deeply appreciate you, and on behalf of the members of the forum, wish to say a big thank you to all. Thank you.
Your Excellency, we do have two governors from the United States, Virginia and Maryland, who are here as part of the resource process for us.